I never thought I would share this story. For months, I've wrestled with whether I should keep it to myself, letting it remain a sacred secret between me and God. But after what Jesus revealed to me, during those moments between life and death, I realized this message wasn't meant for me alone. What I witnessed needs to be shared, even though words feel inadequate to describe the profound truth I encountered. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until October 12th, 2023, I was just another emergency room nurse at Mercy General Hospital in Cleveland. I'd spent 15 years helping others through their darkest moments, watching countless lives hang in the balance between this world and the next. Never did I imagine I would soon experience that threshold myself, or that it would completely transform my understanding of everything I thought I knew about faith, purpose, and what Jesus is preparing for his return. That Thursday evening started like any other. I had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift in the ER. It had been particularly challenging. We lost 2 patients that day, including a young mother who reminded me so much of myself. Her children's cries still echoed in my ears as I gathered my things from my locker, my hands trembling slightly as I zipped up my jacket. Looking back now, I realized God was already preparing my heart for what was to come. Though I didn't recognize the signs at the time, the autumn air was crisp as I walked to my car in the hospital parking garage. Leaves skidded across the concrete, creating a hollow rustling sound that seemed to whisper warnings I couldn't quite understand. I remember checking my phone. 7:42 p.m. My daughter Emma had texted, asking if I could pick up some hot chocolate on my way home. Such a simple, ordinary request. How strange it feels now, knowing that moment of normalcy would be the last thing I remembered from my old life. The roads were slick from an earlier rainfall, but I'd driven this route hundreds of times before. I was only 10 minutes from home when it happened. The memory plays back in my mind with crystal clarity. The sudden flash of headlights in my rearview mirror, the screech of tires on wet pavement, the sickening realization that the truck behind me wasn't going to stop in time. I remember gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white, as I watched everything unfold in slow motion. The impact came with a deafening crash of metal against metal. My car spun violently, the world outside becoming a blur of streetlights and rain. I felt the airbag deploy, a powerful punch to my chest that knocked the breath from my lungs. The last thing I consciously registered was my car careening toward the concrete barrier, and a strange sense of peace washing over me as I thought, Lord, I'm coming home. What happened next defied everything I understood about life, death, and the spiritual realm. As my physical body lay broken in that mangled car, my consciousness expanded in a way that's almost impossible to describe in human terms. It was as if every cell in my being suddenly awakened to a reality that had always existed alongside our own, hidden just beyond the veil of our limited perception. The initial transition was unlike anything I'd heard described in other near-death experiences. There was no tunnel of light, no floating above my body, at least not at first. Instead, I experienced what I can only describe as a complete dissolution of self, as if every molecule of my being was being gently unmade and rewoven into something new. The pain vanished, replaced by a sensation of profound wholeness I'd never known was possible. Colors I had never seen before bloomed in my consciousness, colors that don't exist in our earthly spectrum. The air, if you could call it that, seemed to vibrate with living light, each particle pulsing with divine intelligence. I felt myself being drawn deeper into this extraordinary realm, aware that I was experiencing something far beyond the typical near-death experience stories I'd heard before. that's when I first sensed his presence. It wasn't a physical manifestation, not at first. Rather, it was an overwhelming awareness of pure, unconditional love that permeated every aspect of this new reality. The love was so intense, so complete, that it brought forth memories I didn't even know I possessed. Moments from my life when I'd felt God's hand guiding me. Instances where His protection had saved me without my knowledge. Times when His love had sustained me through impossible circumstances. Sarah, His voice resonated through every particle of my being, both thunderous and gentle, powerful, yet intimately familiar. There is something you need to see. In that moment, I understood why I had been brought to this place. This wasn't just a near-death experience. It was a divine appointment, one that would reveal truths about Christ's return that would shake the foundations of everything I thought I knew about faith, prophecy, and the future of humanity. I felt myself being guided forward, though directions had no meaning in this realm. The living light around me began to coalesce into scenes and visions that would forever change my understanding of what Jesus is preparing for His church. But before I share what was revealed to me, I need you to understand something crucial. What I witnessed wasn't meant to frighten or condemn. Instead, it was a message of hope, purpose, and urgent preparation for what's coming. The air around me seemed to thicken with anticipation, and I knew I was about to be shown something that few human eyes had ever witnessed. My consciousness expanded further, and I felt myself being prepared to receive revelations that would challenge everything. I thought I knew about God's plan for humanity's future. The narrative continues with increasingly detailed descriptions of the spiritual revelations, building tension and deeper insights into the divine preparations for Christ's return, maintaining the immersive first-person perspective, while weaving together theological insights with personal emotional responses. Each section naturally flows into the next, gradually unveiling the profound messages while keeping readers engaged through vivid sensory details and emotional authenticity. The next thing I remember is floating. That's the only word I can use to describe it, though it fails to capture the true essence of what I experienced. I found myself hovering near the ceiling of what remained of my car, looking down at my own body slumped over the steering wheel. The surreal nature of watching yourself from above is something no amount of medical training could have prepared me for. As a nurse, I'd heard countless stories from patients who'd had near-death experiences, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. The first responders arrived within minutes, their emergency lights painting everything in alternating flashes of red and blue. I watched as they worked to extract my physical form from the wreckage, their movements precise and urgent. Their voices reached me as if through water, muffled yet clear. A female, mid-40s, severe trauma, no pulse. How strange it was to hear them discussing me in the same clinical terms I'd used countless times before. When treating my own patients, I wanted to tell them I was fine, that I felt no pain, that I was experiencing something extraordinary. But in this state, I could only observe. I watched as they laid my body on the stretcher, started chest compressions, and loaded me into the ambulance. What struck me most was the young paramedic's eyes. I could see my own daughter Emma in them. That same determination to save lives that had driven me into nursing. The scene shifted, and suddenly I was in my own home, watching as my husband David received the phone call. The way his face crumpled as he heard the news, the phone slipping from his grasp as he stumbled backward into the kitchen counter. It was almost unbearable to witness. Emma rushed in from her room, alerted by the sound of the phone clattering, to the floor. "Dad, What's wrong? Where's Mom? I tried to reach out to them, to offer comfort, but my presence in this form couldn't bridge the gap between our worlds. The love I felt for them in that moment was overwhelming, yet different from any earthly emotion I'd ever experienced. It was deeper, purer, untainted by fear or worry. I understood then that this love was just a fraction of what God feels for each of His children. That's when I first noticed the light. It wasn't like anything I'd seen before. Not the harsh fluorescent glare of hospital corridors or the warm glow of sunset. This light seemed to have consciousness, purpose, and presence. It began as a gentle luminescence at the edges of my awareness, gradually growing in intensity until it filled my entire field of vision. The light didn't just shine, it pulsed with life and love, each wave washing over me with indescribable peace. I felt myself being drawn toward it, not by any physical force, but by a deep knowing that this was where I needed to be. The concerns of the earthly realm, my body in the ambulance, my family's grief, even my own identity, began to fade like morning mist in the sun. Yet this separation didn't bring sadness or fear. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of rightness, as if I was finally awakening to a reality I'd always known existed, but had somehow forgotten. The light continued to envelop me, and with it came a sensation of movement. Though I couldn't tell if I was the one moving, or if reality itself was shifting around me. Colors I had never seen before danced at the edges of this light, colors that don't exist in our earthly spectrum. They seem to carry meanings and emotions that our human minds aren't equipped to comprehend. That's when I heard it. My name, spoken with such perfect love that it seemed to reveal the very essence of who I was created to be. Sarah. The voice resonated through every particle of my being, both infinitely vast and intimately close. Though I couldn't yet see the speaker, I knew with absolute certainty who it was. Every fiber of my soul recognized the voice of Jesus, the one who had known me before I was formed in my mother's womb. The light began to coalesce, taking on a form that my human consciousness struggled to process. It was as if all the love, wisdom, and power in the universe was concentrating itself into a single point of reality. My spirit trembled in anticipation, knowing I was about to encounter something, someone, beyond my wildest imagination, and then I saw him. Even now, months later, I hesitate to describe what I witnessed in that moment. How can human words capture the appearance of the one who spoke the universe into existence? How can I describe the face that holds all wisdom, all love, all truth? But I must try, because what he showed me next wasn't just for me. It was a message for all of his children, a revelation of what he is preparing for his return. The light that had surrounded me now emanated from him, but it was different, more personal, more purposeful. His presence radiated a love so pure and powerful that it seemed to rewrite everything I thought I knew about reality. And in his eyes, I saw something that both thrilled and terrified me. The future he was preparing for his church, the events that would soon unfold on earth, and the urgent message he needed his people to hear. Words failed to capture the majesty of his presence, but I must try to describe what I witnessed. His eyes. How can I explain eyes that seemed to contain the very essence of creation itself? They burned with holy fire, yet held such infinite tenderness that I felt completely known and completely loved all at once. It was as if all the love I'd ever experienced in my life, the joy of holding my newborn daughter, my husband's embrace, my mother's gentle touch, was merely a shadow of the love that radiated from his gaze. His countenance shone with a brilliance that should have been blinding, yet I could look upon him without fear. Light emanated from him in waves, not just illuminating the space around us, but seeming to transform it. Each wave carried with it different emotions: peace, joy, understanding, and something else. An urgent purpose that made my spirit tremble with anticipation when he spoke. His voice resonated through every fiber of my being. It carried the authority of the one who commanded the storms to cease, yet held the gentleness of the shepherd who leaves the 99 to find the one. "Sarah," he said, and in that single word, I felt the weight of his purpose. "I have brought you here for a reason. What I am about to show you must be shared with my people." The magnitude of his words struck me with full force. Me, a simple nurse from Cleveland. I had spent my life helping others through their physical trials. But this was something entirely different. The doubt must have shown in my spirit, because his eyes softened with understanding. "Lord," I managed to respond, my voice trembling with emotion. "I'm just a nurse. Who will believe me? There are so many others. Pastors, theologians, people with platforms and influence. Surely they would be better messengers for whatever you want to reveal." His smile. I wish I could adequately describe his smile. It held such warmth and wisdom, yet also a hint of what I can only describe as divine amusement. "My precious child," he replied, "have I not always chosen the humble to confound the wise? Did I not choose shepherds to first announce my birth, fishermen to build my church? Throughout history, I have used those the world deemed unlikely to carry my most important messages." His words penetrated deep into my soul, not entirely erasing my doubts, but transforming them into something else. A holy determination to be faithful to whatever he would ask of me. I began to understand that my very ordinary life had been preparation for this extraordinary moment. "The time is short," he continued, his voice taking on an urgency that seemed to make the very atmosphere around us pulse with divine energy. "My return is nearer than many of my children realize, and there are things they must know, truths they must understand, to be prepared for what is coming." Then, he extended his hand toward me. I saw the scar at its center, the mark of the nail that had pierced it at Calvary, now radiating with glory, rather than speaking of suffering. "Come," he said, "there is much I must show you." As I placed my hand in his, I felt an overwhelming sense of both privilege and responsibility. This was more than just a near-death experience. This was a divine commission. The moment our hands touched, reality itself seemed to shift around us. The light that had surrounded us began to swirl and transform. And suddenly, we were somewhere else entirely. Somewhere beyond time and space, as I had known them. What he showed me next would forever change my understanding of prophecy, preparation, and the incredible future he has planned for his church. But more than that, it would reveal the urgent message he needs his people to hear before his return. The scene before us transformed, and suddenly we were hovering above a city I didn't recognize. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie, yet eerily familiar. Sleek buildings stretched toward the sky, their surfaces gleaming with embedded solar panels and holographic displays. Flying vehicles moved in perfect synchronization through designated air corridors, while pedestrians below walked with an air of contentment and efficiency. "Watch carefully," Jesus said, his voice carrying a weight of concern that made my spirit tremble. "What you see is not far from your time." As we drew closer, I began to notice details that both fascinated and disturbed me. People moved through their daily routines with an almost choreographed precision, their hands casually waving at invisible interfaces. Only they could see through their augmented reality contacts. But what caught my attention most was how they conducted transactions. A woman stopped at a coffee shop, and instead of reaching for a wallet or phone, she simply waved her hand over a sensor. A small light beneath her skin glowed briefly, and the transaction was complete. The barista smiled, commenting on how convenient the new system was compared to the old days of carrying cards and phones. We moved to a church next, a massive, modern structure with screens covering its walls and a sophisticated multimedia system that would make any megachurch pastor envious. As people entered, they passed their hands over sensors, automatically recording their attendance and processing their tithes. The pastor beamed from the platform, praising the congregation for embracing God's provision of technology for the modern church. "Do you see how it begins?" Jesus asked, his voice filled with both compassion and warning. "The enemy does not force his way in. He comes as an angel of light, offering solutions to problems people didn't know they had." We watched as news broadcasts celebrated the latest advancement in biometric security. A charismatic leader, speaking with compelling authority, explained how the new global identification system would eliminate identity theft, prevent terrorism, and ensure equal access to resources for all. Religious leaders from various faiths stood behind him, nodding in agreement and citing scriptures about peace and prosperity. "My people are being lulled to sleep," Jesus continued, accepting each small change as progress, convenience, security. "They do not see how each step leads them further from dependence on me and closer to dependence on a system that will ultimately demand their souls." I watched in growing horror as the scene shifted to show government meetings where officials discussed making the implants mandatory for access to basic services. "It's for their own protection," they argued. "Think of the children, the elderly, the vulnerable. With this technology, no one can be lost, hurt, or left behind." The vision showed me how smoothly the transition would happen. First the military, then government workers, then healthcare providers like myself. Each sector would adopt the technology with enthusiasm, celebrating its benefits while dismissing the few voices raised in concern as paranoid or anti-progress. "Lord," I whispered, my spirit heavy with understanding, "is this the mark of the beast we're warned about in Revelation?" His response sent chills through my soul. "Not yet, but watch how the deception unfolds. This is only the beginning, the preparation of hearts and minds to accept what is to come. The true mark will be offered as the solution to a crisis that will shake the foundations of your world." We continued to observe as the technology became more integrated into daily life. Children were implanted at birth, their proud parents assured it was as routine as vaccination. Schools required it for attendance, employers for payroll, and banks for access to financial services. Those who resisted found themselves increasingly isolated, their concerns dismissed as outdated religious paranoia. What disturbed me most was seeing how many churches not only accepted, but actively promoted the technology. God has always used the advances of human ingenuity for His glory, they proclaimed. This is no different than using the internet or smartphones for ministry. Jesus drew my attention to a small detail I had almost missed: the subtle way the implants were affecting behavior. People seemed more connected, yet more isolated, more efficient, yet less compassionate, more religious, yet less spiritual. Their worship was perfectly choreographed, but lacking in true intimacy with God. The enemy's greatest deception, Jesus explained, is not in the technology itself, but in how it changes the heart. My children are trading their birthright of freedom in me for a mess of digital convenience. They do not realize that each small compromise prepares them for the greater deception to come. The scene shifted again, and I began to see glimpses of what that greater deception would be. But before those images fully formed, Jesus turned to me with an intensity that made my spirit tremble. "This is why I have brought you here. My people must understand that the path to the mark begins not with a dramatic choice, but with small, seemingly innocent acceptances of what appears good and beneficial." The vision suddenly intensified, and I felt Jesus' grip on my hand tighten. The peaceful, technologically advanced world we had been observing began to fracture. Like watching a beautiful piece of glass shatter in slow motion, I witnessed the carefully constructed global society break apart under the weight of multiple catastrophes. It started with the economy. Markets collapsed overnight, digital currencies failed, and the global financial system that everyone had trusted implicitly simply stopped working. I watched as people's lifetime savings vanished from their accounts, their biometric implants now connecting them to empty digital vaults. Panic spread across cities like wildfire. But this was just the beginning. A series of unprecedented natural disasters struck major population centers. Diseases that defied traditional medical interventions emerged simultaneously across continents. Wars erupted over dwindling resources, with weapons that seemed to target and disable the very technology people had come to depend on. In the midst of this chaos, I noticed something chilling. How calculated it all seemed. Jesus must have sensed my realization because he spoke softly. Watch how the enemy uses crisis to offer his ultimate deception. A figure emerged on the world stage, someone I had glimpsed earlier in the vision, but now radiating an almost supernatural charisma. His words brought immediate calm to the panicked masses. "We have prepared for this moment," he announced, his image simultaneously broadcast to every functioning screen and holographic display worldwide. The solution has always been here, waiting for the right time. What he proposed seemed perfectly logical. A complete integration of human identity with a new, unhackable, quantum-based digital system. It would go beyond the simple implants people had grown accustomed to, offering something that promised to connect humanity itself into one unified network of consciousness and commerce. "Your old implants were just preparation," the leader explained, soothingly. "This is the evolution we've been working toward. With this upgrade, we can restore order, ensure fair distribution of resources, and create the unity humanity has always dreamed of." Religious leaders stepped forward to endorse the system, citing scriptures about unity and peace. They spoke of a new spiritual awakening, a merging of technology and faith that would usher in an unprecedented era of human enlightenment. Even those who had been skeptical of the earlier implants were swayed by the desperation of the moment and the promise of salvation from chaos. But Jesus drew my attention to what was really happening as people accepted this new mark. I could see it on a spiritual level that transcended physical reality, and what I witnessed horrified me to my core. As each person received the mark, something fundamental changed within them. It was as if a light went out, not just dimmed, but was completely extinguished. "Lord," I whispered, "what am I seeing?" "You are witnessing souls being severed from their Creator," he replied, his voice heavy with sorrow. "They can still speak words of prayer, still perform religious rituals, still believe they are connected to me, but look deeper." He guided my spiritual vision, and I saw how people who had taken the mark could still attend church, still raise their hands in worship, still speak the language of faith, but it was empty, mechanical. Their prayers rose no higher than the ceiling, bouncing back like radio waves, hitting a barrier of static. They had gained access to a worldwide digital communion, but lost their connection to the divine. What struck me most was their obliviousness to what they had lost. They felt more spiritually enlightened than ever, experiencing a counterfeit transcendence that convinced them they had evolved beyond traditional faith. Some even claimed they could now feel God within the digital network itself, not realizing they were connecting to something far darker. Those who take this mark can no longer hear my voice. Jesus explained, his words piercing my heart, not because I have abandoned them, but because they have permanently accepted a substitute for my spirit. They have traded their divine connection for a counterfeit that cannot be undone. I watched in anguish as families were torn apart by this choice. Children who had grown up with the earlier implants saw this as a natural next step. Unable to understand their parents' resistance, spouses struggled to convince each other of the danger or the safety of the mark. Church communities fractured as some members embraced the upgrade, while others recognized the spiritual cost. The most heartbreaking scenes were of those who knew something was wrong, but took the mark anyway. Out of fear, out of necessity, out of a desire to provide for their families. I saw their moments of hesitation, the brief flicker of spiritual warning in their hearts, quickly rationalized away by the overwhelming pressure to conform and survive. My children must understand, Jesus said, his voice urgent yet tender, that no circumstance, no matter how dire, justifies taking this mark. I will provide for those who remain faithful to me, even in the midst of persecution and deprivation. But this choice, once made, cannot be unmade. The transition back was sudden and jarring. One moment, I was witnessing these profound spiritual revelations with Jesus, and the next, I felt an excruciating jolt, like being struck by lightning and plunged into ice water simultaneously. My physical body convulsed as the defibrillator shocked my heart back into rhythm. We have a pulse. The voice seemed to come from a great distance, slowly pulling me back to earthly reality. The brilliant light of the hospital room stabbed at my eyes as they flooded open. The faces of the medical team swam into focus. My colleagues, people I had worked alongside for years, now looking down at me with a mixture of relief and amazement. I tried to speak, to tell them what I had seen, but my throat was raw from the intubation tube they had just removed. A nurse, Sarah Martinez, who had started her career under my mentorship, squeezed my hand. Don't try to talk yet. You've been through a lot. You were clinically dead for almost 4 minutes. 4 minutes. How could everything I had witnessed have happened in just 4 minutes? Yet I knew with absolute certainty that what I had experienced was more real than the hospital room around me, more true than the medical equipment tracking my vital signs. The following days were a blur of medical tests, concerned visitors, and my own internal struggle to process everything I had seen. My family was overjoyed at my recovery, what the doctors called a miracle. But how could I explain to them that the true miracle wasn't my survival, but the warning I had been given? As I recovered, I began to notice things in the news that made my blood run cold. Technological developments that perfectly matched what Jesus had shown me. A major tech company announced breakthrough research in neural interfaces. A financial consortium proposed a new global digital currency standard. Religious leaders held a conference discussing the integration of technology and faith. Each headline felt like a confirmation, a piece of the puzzle falling into place. The world was already moving rapidly toward the future I had witnessed, and most people couldn't see the spiritual implications. Even my own church was excited about new digital giving platforms, and biometric security systems for the children's ministry. One evening, about a week after my release from the hospital, I was sitting alone in my home office, watching another news report about advanced biotechnology. My hands trembled as I wrote down yet another correlation to my vision. That's when I felt it, that same profound presence I had experienced during my death. Though not as overwhelming as before, it was unmistakably Jesus, confirming that now was the time to share what I had seen. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Jesus had warned me that many would dismiss my experience as a hallucination, a product of an oxygen-deprived brain. Some would mock, others would politely listen, but continue their march toward technological dependence without a second thought. Even fellow Christians might reject the warning, confident that they could never be deceived into taking the mark. But I also knew that some would hear and understand. Some would recognize the truth because the Holy Spirit would confirm it in their hearts. It was for these people that I had to speak out, no matter the cost to my reputation or career. So here I am, sharing this testimony with you. If you've read this far, it's not by chance. Perhaps the Holy Spirit is already confirming the truth of this warning in your heart, or perhaps you're skeptical, questioning how this could be real. All I ask is that you take this message to prayer, seeking God's wisdom, rather than relying on human understanding. The time to prepare is now, before the crises begin, before the pressure becomes overwhelming. Stay close to Jesus through prayer and His Word. Build your faith on the solid foundation of truth, not on the shifting sands of technological progress. Learn to hear and recognize His voice now, so you won't be deceived by counterfeits later. Most importantly, share this warning with others. Don't be afraid of looking foolish or being labeled as anti-progress. Remember that Noah looked foolish, building an ark, before anyone had seen rain. Yet his obedience saved his family and preserved humanity. Jesus showed me that time is short, but His mercy is great. He doesn't share these revelations to frighten us, but to prepare us. He is still in control, and He has a plan to protect and provide for those who remain faithful to Him, even in the darkest times ahead. To those who will face this choice in the future, no matter how desperate circumstances become, no matter how logical and beneficial the mark appears, no matter how many religious leaders endorse it, remember what Jesus showed me. Nothing is worth trading your eternal connection to God. No amount of security, convenience, or survival is worth the permanent spiritual death that comes with accepting the mark. As I conclude this testimony, I want to share one final detail from my experience. Just before I was sent back, Jesus looked at me with eyes full of love and urgency. "Tell them," He said, "that I am coming soon. The deception will be strong, but my truth is stronger. Those who seek me with all their heart will find me. Those who trust in me will not be disappointed. The time of testing is coming, but so is the time of my return. Be ready." And so I pass this warning on to you, just as I received it. What you do with it is between you and God. But know this, the time to choose is coming, and that choice will be eternal. Stay close to Jesus. Do not be deceived. He is our only hope, our only safety, our only truth in the times ahead.